They get to Pat DeRosa of 1990 memo fame, which actually was based on a call from 1987. And Pat DeRosa is calling on Doug Lair, Chief of the Emergency Response and Removal Branch for EPA, Region 4, asking if this site would qualify for an immediate removal action. She inserts that at the time of the earlier screening, 1991, when it was released, 1990 when it was tested, that the nearest groundwater well was believed to be 4,000 feet away. As I said, they will identify 9 wells within a quarter of a mile to use as monitoring wells in 2000. She went on to say that TCE, 53,000 parts per billion, had been identified in subsurface soils near a waste sump outside the plating room in an earlier study. That's right, 1987. The big problem here is that EPA had prematurely removed this CTS of Asheville site from its surplus inventory. I would imagine that Don Rigger, who was on scene as the project manager, started to realize that what's going to happen if people ask us why CTS of Asheville site got green lighted when it had never been properly screened. I would imagine that they got together and were talking about this and were trying to figure their way out of this. Because I can tell you that the implications affect people's health and that people have died, including Ethel Robinson, that might not have died due to the prolonged exposure that she faced with TCE in her water. Maybe she's not dead after all. They also had to be scratching their heads about what people are going to say on the other side of that plant when they realized they bought houses an average cost of $385,000 on a toxic waste site, and that EPA Region 4 Division of Waste Management had prematurely given the corporation permission to come off of their inventory of surplus sites. What do you think they did? They knew that it was 21,000 in the Rice property. They knew that the well that the springs they used to drink from was 15,000. They knew that the Robinson well across the street was 270 parts per billion of 1 to 2 DCE. That's exactly what they found in 1990 at the Rice property, 1,100 parts per billion. They knew it had TCE. They knew they were in trouble. And they were staring at this document, and they were reading about 2 homes with 3 adults and 2 small grandchildren at the Robinsons. And they were reading about 2 adults at Terry Rice's with young children, Larry Rice Jr. and his family. Now this well at the Robinson family climbed from 270 parts per billion to 900 parts per billion in the spring of 2008. The EPA withheld that information from the Robinsons for almost 10 months. We found out that its maximum so far that we know of eclipsed 1,100 parts per billion of TCE in 2008 in the fall, after the state of North Carolina had stopped using data for their study, which again was 11 months late. So the question is, what would happen to the CTS of Asheville site that had been active, that you had a point of discovery in 1980, that you had a site inspection that took place for CA SD02, CASS02, CASD05, all those fall under this date right here, February 21st, 1991. What are they going to do? Well, Don Rigger was in a meeting with us, with, again, John Mitchell on behalf of Senator Burr, and as I said, Kay Hagan, Senator Hagan's people were there, and Congressman Schuler. And Don Rigger, when I said, Don, you've been on that site for about 10 years. And he said, well, I don't know about that. If you tell me I've been, I'll have to take your word for it. And I said, Don, I can put you there on August 25th when you were quoted in the Citizen Times saying that it was the site, as far as the contamination at the springs go, were some of the highest you'd ever seen, which is interesting because you guys at EPA didn't do anything to address those springs until 2009, when you said it was the highest you'd ever seen in 1999. But I said I could put you there then. You also said that it was analogous to put a Band-Aid on a bleeding cut. Well, Don Rigger ended up being the project manager, and all the paperwork went through him, and we have all that paperwork. And like this and all the rest of it, we've made copies, and those copies are already out and on their way. So what does the EPA do? What does Rigger do? What do these guys do when they're sitting there scratching their head about this site that they prematurely let off their surplus inventory? Well, their actions had to be supported by NCDENR and local officials, no doubt, to pull this off. But what they did, which has led to absolutely no cleanup on the site itself, is that they created a brand new Superfund site and dropped it on the Rice property. The very victims get victimized one step further. The very people that had been contaminated are now, by way of paper, being treated as if they're the contaminator. They put it at 273 Mills Gap Road in Asheville. They call it the Mills Gap Road Groundwater Contamination Site. They say that the point of discovery is, lo and behold, August 1999, when Division of Water Quality and NCDENR called them out there. That's interesting because NCDENR, by way of the state toxicologist, referenced CaSDO2, and that was on the Rice property, and they knew it in 1990. And now they're going to act like their point of discovery is 9 years later. I'm afraid that that is, in my opinion, criminal fraud. And people are sick and dead, which makes this a lot more serious than it ever needed to be. And ever since this point, when those guys got together and realized what had happened, they put every major action, including the administrative order on consent, the negotiations for how to clean up CTS plant property, they put it under the Rice's address. There's something fundamentally wrong and obscene with this, and they're going to have to answer to it. Let's look a little closer. Again, the Rice property is at 273 Mills Gap Road. CTS property is 235 Mills Gap Road. There's the surplus cover sheet. The date on that, February 22nd, 1991, for the CTS Asheville site. Point of discovery, 1999? I don't think so. Their report was submitted right here and received on the 22nd. It was submitted as a site inspection detailing not only the old lagoon and the convergence of the two streams, which makes the Southside Village contaminated, but it also makes the Rice property bear the brunt of the cover-up. Again, the EPA Region 4 trespassed onto the Rice property by way of their proxy NUS Corporation. They never informed the Rices of the results of that 1 to 2 DCE sample at 1,100 parts per billion, 79 times higher than the background sample. And if you don't, I mean, again, I know that people have had the ability to use maps and read maps for a long time. If you use MapQuest and you type in 273 Mills Gap Road, that's where it takes you. There's CTS. There's Terry Rice's house. There's CaSDO2. That's the private drive that would have taken him there. Larry Rice right there, nestled in those woods. Dot and Larry Sr. right there. Type in 235 Mills Gap Road, and lo and behold, there is the CTS site, and there's the guardhouse, and that's where it is. They tried to pull a slick one on us. They tried to say that the Mills Gap groundwater contamination site was at 273 Mills Gap Road, when all along it's been here.